1. I should probably declare at the start that even at this age I'd already had experiences with some very bad people, and had crimes I'm not allowed to talk about on this sub committed against me. It will help explain my reaction to this situation, even though I was young. When I was 7 and my brother 4, we lived in a nice end terrace house in a city. The right side of our house and garden joined onto the back of a row of guest houses. The last of these backed onto the side of the very back end of our garden, where an apple tree in their garden hung over our garage. There was a metal spiral staircase leading from ground level to the second floor of this guest house, which was the top floor. We could always see inside the top floor in all weathers, as the door was always left open for ventilation, and it seemed to be the primary or only exit. There were no windows in this bedsit-style flat at the top. I could see more into the flat from my bedroom, which was at the back of the house and had a bay window so I could see out to either side. A 6-foot wall ran around from the garage to just under my bedroom window. The left side of our house was adjacent to the house belonging to the Wong family, next door. A boy joined my class late in the school year. I was the smallest in my class and a girl, and he was not much bigger than me. Golden blonde, tanned and slim. In an area where most white children were blonde or dark-haired, I stuck out wherever I went with masses of long, dark red hair. It drew attention. It drew negative attention too often. The new boy's name was Stefan. I recognized him. He had moved into the top floor bedsit next to my house. He struggled in class and I would help him out. Working closer to him, I noticed he had a strange accent, struggled to concentrate, and had dark circles under his eyes. He didn't wear a uniform. We would walk back from school together and wave across the hall. Sometimes I would wave from my bedroom window. This was over a few weeks. One day my family were getting ready to go to a christening, and so my brother and I had been dressed in smart clothes. We were told to go into the garden and wait until our parents were ready, but warned not to get dirty. So we just mooched about a bit. Suddenly Stefan appeared on the top of our garage, beaming smiles at us and making chit-chat. He was picking apples from the tree. As he picked, he threw the apples down to us to collect. When finished, he clambered down the wall into our garden. He had never been in our garden before and hadn't been invited in. I wasn't used to people inviting themselves in, and it made me nervous. He started picking up the apples from the pile we had made, and asked for help to carry them upstairs to the flat. My brother readily volunteered and started picking them up. Stefan opened our back garden gate and walked out, my brother following. I called out to my brother and said we shouldn't go because Mum and Dad would wonder where we were. He pointed out we shouldn't be rude. Can you tell we're British? So I begrudgingly picked up the remaining apples and followed. As we were walking up the metal stairs, Mrs. Wong from next door called out to me and asked where we were going, shading her eyes from the sun. I replied we were helping carry apples upstairs. She looked concerned and I began to feel more uneasy. She remained watching us until we were in the flat. Once inside, Stefan walked us across the room to put the apples in the sink. It was a one-room living area with the kitchen part at the very back, a table on the right and a doorway that, presumably, led to a bathroom. There was a small TV on the kitchen counter. There were 2 men in the room. One was clearly related to Stefan, blonde, tanned, and slim with the same facial features. He was standing on the left near the entrance doorway. The other man was older, dark-haired, heavier with a mustache, and was wearing a sort of fishing hat. He was at the kitchen table on the right. The room had an odd smell and a strange atmosphere. I had seen the dark-haired man before from my bedroom, on the metal balcony at the top of the stairs. but I had never seen the blonde man. Once the apples were deposited in the sink, Stefan's attitude and demeanor completely changed. He stood as far into the corner by the sink as he possibly could, squashing himself in there. His face went very dark and unfriendly, and he stopped speaking, looking at the floor. First red flag. The blonde man shut the door. Second red flag. My survival instincts kicked in. The dark-haired man started making pleasant small talk, and I started slowly backing toward the door, looking for another way out but knowing there wasn't one. The blonde-haired man painfully grabbed my arm and said, "Where do you think you're going?" He was staring hard and aggressively into my face. I kept my cool and stared back, saying, "Home, let go of my arm," and trying to tug my arm away from him. The dark-haired man was talking to my brother, who had gone over to him. He was touching my brother's head, and it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. The dark-haired man was clearly in charge. He said something to my brother about having a pretty sister. He looked up at me and said, "That's a pretty dress you have on. It looks expensive." I replied, "That's because we're going to a christening. Our mom and dad will be looking for us soon because we're supposed to go in 5 minutes, so you'd better let us go, or I'll scream." I was still trying to back towards the door. This whole time, my heart had been trying to hammer its way through my chest. The room became very tense. The dark-haired man looked at me and said quietly, "But nobody knows you're here, and no one will hear you." Until this point, I still had doubts about my interpretation of their intentions. Not anymore. My brother was watching me closely and finally seemed to realize something was up. He became very still. Stefan's face was full of anger. I looked up at the blonde man and said, "Let go of my arm, it hurts." He just stared at me. I looked back at the dark-haired man and said, "You're wrong. Somebody does know where we are. I waved to Mrs. Wong on the way up the stairs and told her we were coming in with Stefan." I elaborated here with Stefan's name. I knew I had to get us out quickly. The longer it took, the less likely we would get out at all. The dark-haired man surveyed me for a few seconds, and everything was very quiet. He almost looked amused. He was clearly trying to work out if I was lying, and whether the risk was worth it, which is what I was banking on. Finally, he looked at the blonde man and said, "Let them go." I started beckoning my brother towards me, and he slowly started to walk over. When he got close enough, I grabbed his hand. The blonde man still had hold of my arm and started to argue. The dark-haired man said, "Open the door and let them go." He had never moved from his chair. The blonde man gave me a hateful look, opened the door and threw my arm away. As I was pushing my brother out the door, I looked back at Stefan. His face was twisted with hate and anger, still backed into the corner. I felt guilty but knew I had to get my brother out of there. We ran down the stairs with me pushing him all the way. Mrs. Wong was still there watching. I looked back and saw the flat door had been closed again. I dreaded to think what was happening in there. I actually locked our back door when we got inside. We were probably only in the flat for about 7 minutes. Never was I more grateful for the nosiness of Mrs. Wong. We never told our parents what happened. Mrs. Wong asked me the next day if we were okay. I lied and said something passive about just helping the boy with apples, but she looked suspicious. I never saw Stefan in school again. However, a couple of days later I heard a noise in the middle of the night and looked out my bedroom window. Stefan was standing on top of our garage, staring angrily at my window. This freaked me out, and I quickly checked all the windows were locked, but knew he couldn't get in. I closed the curtains and stayed on the other side of the room all night. The next night I heard another noise on the wall outside my window. I never opened the curtains as I didn't want to see him, but could see his shadow when I went closer. That flat door remained closed for about 2 weeks. I checked it every day when we came home from school. I learned at school that Stefan was actually 2 years older than me. After the 2 weeks, I came home from school to see that the door was open again. I panicked, watched it for hours from my bedroom until I finally saw that a new family had moved in. Stefan and the 2 men were gone. To this day, because of this episode, and a separate one, I cannot go near a window to open curtains in the day or open and close them in the dark. They remain at whatever state they're in until someone else moves them. I've always felt ashamed that I didn't prevent this situation, even though I know it wasn't my fault. And I guess I'll never shake that off. And I will never forget my little brother's words as we ran back through our garden and into the house. Were they bad people? Edit. In reference to not telling their parents. Our parents are narcissists, and would have blamed me for the entire situation, and putting my brother in danger, as they had already done a few times. So we just kept quiet. 2. Background. I'm a man in my late 20s. I work graveyard, midnight to late AM, and have since I turned 18. At the time of this story, I lived with my wife and newborn daughter in a 3rd-story apartment. Front door to the apartment and a small kitchen window are both accessible from the outside, but all other windows and the patio door, which is attached to the living room, are about 40 feet off the ground. We live in a pretty safe neighborhood, but it's surrounded by some pretty sketchy areas. Also important to note is that the only air conditioner we have is window mounted in our master bedroom, so all 3 of us were sleeping in that one room. Daughter was only a month old at the time. Story. It's late July and blistering hot outside. I'm a cold weather kind of person, so anything over 75 degrees, and I'm fucking miserable. So I've got the windows open and the sliding door to the deck is wide open too, trying to get a breeze going through the house, since only the bedroom has AC. To make matters worse, I've come down with this fever that is just kicking my ass, and I've just had a baby, so I'm running on about 10 hours of sleep for the whole of the last month. As I said, I normally work graveyard, but this particular night, as I went out to the living room to get dressed for work, I could barely lift my arms. You know how when you have a fever your muscles turn to jello and everything hurts? That's me to the max, so I said fuck it. Called into work and passed out hard on the couch in the living room. I proceed to have hardcore fever dreams, and eventually wake in a pool of my own sweat. Check the clock. I've only been out for about 30 minutes. I start trying to go back to sleep when I hear this thump, thump, thump. I could not for the life of me figure out where this was coming from. Thump, 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 thump. It's not loud, but it seems like it's right on top of me. I listen as closely as my disease-addled brain will allow me. And nothing. The noise is gone as quickly as it began. I take a peek on the video monitor to make sure my daughter is doing okay, and promptly go back to sleep. Thump, thump, shh. Thump, thump, shh. As I'm once again awake, and trying to figure out what that fucking noise is, my attention is drawn to my infant daughter crying in the other room. I know this means she's hungry, so I peel my ass off the couch and go to the kitchen to begin making her bottle. My wife emerges from the bedroom, unaware that I'm home, and gasps with surprise, which startled me as well. I turn towards her to put her at ease, which causes the living room and the patio to be in my line of vision, though not hers as she's still in the hallway. As I'm telling her it's okay, it's just me, I see something fall from the roof of the patio, and then a moment later a man dressed from head to toe in black drops down from the motherfucking roof of our 3-story building onto my patio. My feverish, sleep-deprived brain went full panic mode. I tried to think of words to blurt out, but all that came out was a loud panic scream as I took off running from the kitchen towards the patio door, which is wide open. The only thing keeping this fuckhead out is the flimsy-ass screen, which isn't even locked, and I'm moving like I've got cement blocks for feet, thanks to this fever. Luckily, he heard my incomprehensible yelp and saw me running towards him in the darkness, and decided to scurry back onto the roof like a fucking ninja. I pull the door closed and lock it. My wife runs off to call 911. While waiting for the police to arrive, I see that he has left his duffel bag on my deck. When the police show up and investigate the bag, I was very upset by what they found inside. Zip ties, duct tape, condoms, disposable cameras, rope, a rather sizable dildo, a couple box cutters, and a nice big hunting knife. I have little doubt of what this man came to do that night, and if I had not decided to stay home, I don't see what would have stopped him. So, you crazy ninja fuck, let's never meet. 3. This happened a few years ago, right before I deployed to the Middle East. I'm in the National Guard, so before we deployed, we had to train up at Fort Hood, Texas. After our training was finished, we got a 4-day pass. I was single, no kids, so I decided instead of going home, I would travel around Texas. After a few days in Austin, I wanted to see the Gulf, so I traveled to Rockport, Texas. I parked my rental about a 10-minute walk away from the beach, since it was a nice day, and I don't mind walking. It was pretty quiet, as it was about 9 a.m., but there were still quite a few people there. I was laying out and reading my Kindle when a heavily tattooed young guy walks up to where I'm laying, and he asks if he can leave his clothes near me while he takes a dip. I say sure. He goes in the ocean, and I don't really think much of it. He comes out of the water about 10 minutes later, and proceeds to lay down next to me and starts chatting. I kind of want to be left alone, but he seemed harmless, and I didn't want to be rude, so I talked with him for a bit. His name is Angel, and he said he lived about 30 minutes away. He tells me he would have joined the military, but he spent time in prison. I don't ask for what. He tells me it was for some mix-up. This mix-up landed him 8 years. I try and direct the conversation to more harmless things, but he doesn't act like a lonely stranger or even a guy trying to hit on a girl. He's completely uninterested in anything except why I'm here and who I'm with. Then he starts getting real creepy. He keeps repeating to me that, "You're really all alone? You came here by yourself? You're not with anyone?" Alarm bells are ringing. I didn't actually phrase any of it quite like that, but he read between the lines. Note to future self, always pretend to be waiting for friends. I start stressing that I'm leaving that day, I wasn't, and that I'm in the military and have to be back soon or they'll consider me AWOL. And start looking for me. True, but not for another 2 days when my pass is up. He pretty much ignores all of this, and I notice that we are both watching people walk by us carefully, if that makes sense. Luckily for me, it was getting more crowded and families were walking by us in pretty steady intervals. He starts asking me what kind of car I drove, what hotel I'm staying in. He asks me where I'm parked. I tell him a rental. I'm leaving, and I don't remember where I'm parked. I've been creeped out for a while now, and I've been in some dangerous situations before. But I've never been more frightened than in broad daylight, surrounded by people, talking with this creep. He then starts telling me about this party in town later tonight, and that I should come. I could meet all his friends. He offers to drive me. Again, I bring up that I'm leaving. I'm in the military and all that jazz. He continues to be amazed that I'm here all by myself. He also tells me he's parked right behind us, Do I want to see his car? No. No, I do not. I tell him I'm comfortable where I'm at. He has also put on his cargo shorts he took off for his ocean dip. He kept rubbing one of the pockets while he talked to me. There was definitely something in there. I doubt it was a gun, but this guy was scaring the hell out of me, and it made me wonder if he had a knife or something. Now, I know it seems strange that I didn't just up and leave, but this guy was making every hair in the back of my neck stand up, and I wanted to extract myself without pissing him off. Then, after mentioning the party again, he says something even creepier. He looks at my legs and says, "I bet you can run for days." What the fuck? There was zero context for this statement. We weren't talking about working out, athletics, the Olympics, fitness routines, or even military training. None of those topics came up, ever, the whole time he was creeping me out. I look over and a family is walking by us fairly close, so I leapt up and started gathering my stuff, telling him I gotta go to the restroom. See you later. I power walk down closer to the water and walk along the beach in the opposite direction of my car, towards the pier where there were restrooms and snacks, etc. He followed me the entire way, talking on his cell phone. I was walking along the beach while he was walking along the edge of the parking lot that ran parallel. Once I reached the pier, I doubled back to where my car was actually parked. I watched him until he finally stopped following me. There was a small booth that the parking attendant sat in. I parked in the free lot behind her, but I stopped and told her the situation. Described the car I was getting into, which she could see from her booth. She agreed to make sure I got in my car safely. A little paranoid, since I was fairly certain he'd stopped following me. But just in case. I'm just glad the beach was fairly crowded. Beach creep. Let's not meet again. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 170. I would of course like to say thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I did notice in that last story there, the fella Angel, or possibly Angel, he might be Hispanic, so I'm not sure how it's meant to be pronounced. There was another woman in the comments who described a creeper with the same name, I assume, in the comments that had also creeped her in Texas, so it's quite possible it was the same guy. He's on the loose if you're in Texas. Please beware of Angel the beach creeper. Okay, let me think. Any news? Oh yes, I'm going to start working, leaving it a bit later than I planned to, but I've not been feeling very well. So I'm going to start working on my next 30 Scary Stories video. The plan for that is to be out by the end of January. So I do have a few stories already, but I will be sending out many messages this week and asking people to let me use their stories, trying to gather them for the end of the month. Okay, and with that I think I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.